They say old money runs deep, but in the case of the Sinclair family, it ran red. Beneath the gilded fields of 1817 Virginia, a blood covenant was forged, not for power, but for something far more ravenous. Generations fed it. One dared to starve it. When the deed to the Sinclair estate arrived in the mail, I nearly threw it away. It came in an envelope the color of spoiled milk, addressed in a spidery hand that I didn't recognize. I was living in a cramped apartment above a laundromat in Richmond, working graveyard shifts at a diner that smelled perpetually of old grease and regret. The idea of owning land, let alone a mansion in rural Virginia, felt like the setup to a joke I didn't know the punchline to. But there it was, official and notarized, a sprawling property in the heart of Dinwiddie County, untouched for nearly half a century, passed down through bloodlines I'd long forgotten I belonged to. I had no love for family. My mother never spoke of her ancestors, only that we come from a bad line. She died alone in a county hospital, whispering things that didn't make sense to the nurses. Something about the old chapel and him with no eyes. I was too late to hear her final words. That guilt had been eating me ever since. So when the papers arrived, I saw it less as a gift and more as penance. Maybe I thought I could walk the same halls my ancestors did. Maybe I could understand why my mother drank herself into silence, and why I sometimes woke in the night with tears on my face and no memory of dreaming. I arrived at the Sinclair estate just past dusk on an August evening. The land was choking on itself. Kudzu climbed every surface. Trees leaned toward the house like eavesdroppers, and the air was thick with the smell of rot and honeysuckle. The mansion loomed above the road, 3 stories of gabled decay and shuttered windows. A black iron gate, twisted with rust, groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was cooler. Not pleasant, just still, as if the house were holding its breath. The foyer was a cathedral of shadows. Faded portraits lined the walls, their eyes long scratched away by something more precise than time. The furniture was covered in white sheets, like ghosts waiting for a cue. The chandelier above was missing half its crystals, and the grand staircase split the house like a wound. I didn't unpack that night. I barely made it to the bedroom, which still bore the musty scent of lavender and something bitter. I lay down on a 4-poster bed that groaned under my weight, too tired to care that the sheets hadn't been changed in decades. That's when I first heard the whispers. They came from beneath the floorboards, soft at first, like wind under a door. But as I strained to listen, they sharpened. A low murmur of voices speaking in unison, just below the edge of language. Male, female, child, a chorus of something not quite human. I sat up, my heart clanging in my chest. The whispers stopped. I stood and pressed my ear to the wooden floor. Nothing. Maybe it was old pipes. Maybe it was wind. Houses that old had ways of talking to themselves. I convinced myself of that and lay back down, but sleep was a door I couldn't open. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. The house remembers. It always remembers. Around 3 a.m, I heard something shift under the bed. A dragging noise. I froze. The floor groaned, not from the house settling, but from weight. Footsteps moving beneath the boards. Not rats. Too deliberate. I swung my legs over the side and stood. The whispers returned, clearer this time. Words began to separate from the murmur. Not yet, not yet. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. The beam caught on something near the corner, a seam in the floorboard I hadn't noticed before. Clumsily, I knelt and pried at the edge of the heel of my boot. The board lifted with a groan. Beneath it was a shallow cavity, barely big enough to hide anything meaningful. But nestled inside was a leather-bound journal, warped with age and water damage. The name etched into the cover had faded, but I could still make it out under the beam. Deliverance Sinclair. I ran my fingers over the name. The letter was cold, unnaturally so. As I pulled it free, something sighed beneath the floor, long and low, like relief or regret. The floorboard snapped back into place with a noise like a bone breaking. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I sat by the dust-choked window, the journal in my lap, watching the trees sway in a wind I couldn't feel. The house had given me something. Or Maybe it was a warning. Either way, I knew two things before the sun rose over the moss-dark fields. This house was alive, and it wanted to be remembered. The summer of 1817 was the driest in Virginia's memory. The fields cracked and turned to dust beneath the hooves of starving horses, and the Appomattox shrank to a sluggish, mud-choked trickle. Crops wilted before they could sprout, and the sky remained a blank and merciless sheet of heat. It was a season the townsfolk whispered about in later years, the one they refused to write down, as if ink might carry the curse forward. At the center of it all stood Enoch Sinclair. He was not yet the legend he would become. Then, he was simply a man with dwindling fortunes and a reputation as a land baron who had overreached. His estate was vast, but his fields were barren. His family, though noble in name, was dwindling. A wife dead in childbirth, 2 sons lost of fever. Only his daughter remained, Deliverance, a pale and silent girl with eyes too sharp for her years. On the third night of the solstice, as thunderheads massed on the horizon without promise of rain, a stranger appeared at Enoch's doorstep. He arrived with no horse, no shoes, and no name. His coat was threadbare, his face smeared with red clay, and his eyes, those eyes, were pits of liquid pitch, reflecting no light. The servants refused him entry. Enoch, desperate and proud, invited him in any way. They dined in silence by candlelight, the air thick with heat and the scent of spoiled wine. The stranger spoke little, but when he did, his voice was as smooth as molasses and twice as slow. "I come bearing opportunity," he said, staring across the table at Enoch, as if reading scripture behind his eyes. Enoch laughed bitterly. "Have you seen my fields? There's no fortune here, only ash and debt." The stranger smiled, revealing teeth too uniform, too white. "Gold is but one measure of fortune. There are deeper wells to draw from, older veins to tap." Enoch leaned forward. "What are you offering?" The stranger produced a small, carved box from within his coat. He opened it to reveal a scroll bound in hair and a dagger with a handle made of antler. The blade shimmered even in the dim candlelight. "A covenant," the stranger said, "sealed in blood. The land shall flourish, the vault shall swell, and your name shall echo beyond death." Enoch eyed the box warily. "What's the cost?" The stranger's smile never wavered. "Blood is the coin, but not yours. Not yet." They went into the chapel that night. The original one, built with stone dragged from the riverbed, now lost to time and ivy. The ritual was done by moonlight, beneath symbols gouged. Into the altar long before Virginia was ever charted on a map. Enoch slit his palm with the blade, and the stranger collected each drop as if it were wine. He spoke words in a tongue that no one should have remembered. The wind howled in response, though the air outside was still, and when the final syllable passed his lips, the earth itself seemed to shudder. Enoch stumbled out of the chapel with the scroll clutched in his bloodied hand. The stranger was gone. By morning, the rains came. Not a trickle, but a deluge. The fields drank greedily, and within weeks, crops sprang from the soil like they'd been summoned. Corn higher than a man's head. Tobacco leaves broad as bed linens. The Sinclair land blossomed into paradise, and with it, gold. A shaft was discovered behind a northern grove. Veins of raw or gleaming from the walls like God had kissed the earth. The Sinclair fortune soared. Enoch rebuilt the estate in grand fashion. Marble floors, imported chandeliers, hand-carved banisters. He hosted lavish parties for neighboring landowners, and guests whispered in awe of the sudden prosperity. But beneath the bounty, something else grew. The workers began disappearing. First one, then another. A hand found in a barrel of grain. A woman vanished from her bed, her nightdress left folded as if by unseen hands. Whispers started in the town, but they died quickly, buried under Sinclair gold. Deliverance watched all this with growing dread. Her father no longer walked like a man, but glided, his eyes too bright, his skin too pale. He spoke in riddles. He no longer cast a shadow at dusk. One night, she followed him, down through the cellar, through a bricked-over doorway she had never noticed before, into the bowels of the earth. There, beneath the foundation, was a room that didn't belong, a stone circle older than the house, older than Virginia itself. Her father stood at its center, hands raised. Around him, candles burned with blue flame. On the altar lay a calf. No, not a calf. Something like a calf, but with fingers. Deliverance ran. The next morning, the harvest was richer still. The gold vein doubled. She said nothing. Not yet. Enoch Sinclair's prosperity became legend, but so did his isolation. He took no new bride. He rarely left the estate. And his eyes, oh, those eyes, they grew darker by the year until they resembled a stranger's. The town of Varnum, once thriving beside the estate, began to rot. Its wells turned sour. Its children were born mute or blind. Crops failed even as Sinclair's flourished. The boundary between the lands became an invisible line no man dare cross after sundown. And through it all, Enoch never aged. Deliverance wrote her first journal entry that year, binding the letter with her own hands. She hid it beneath the floorboards of the east wing bedroom, where the whispers never ceased and the boards were always warm. The first line read, "Father made a pact, and it is my curse to remember." By the spring of 1818, the Sinclair estate was transformed into something biblical. The field shimmered gold under the sun, stalks of wheat and corn so tall they whispered secrets to the wind. Tobacco leaves were fragrant and unblemished, hanging in the curing barns like veils in a cathedral. The soil turned dark and rich, the kind that sucked at your boots as if reluctant to let you go. Livestock fattened on scraps, giving birth to twins and triplets, each calf or piglet born stronger than the last. But beneath this miraculous abundance lay something else, something no harvest could mask. The land felt wrong. Men would return from the fields with scratches they couldn't explain, as though brambles had clawed them in open air. Tools rusted overnight. Birds stopped singing around the estate. And at dusk, the wind carried sounds that weren't wind at all, whispers, cries, sometimes even laughter that turned to sobs. Still, Enoch Sinclair prospered. His wealth grew faster than could be measured. Gold was pulled from the earth daily, in chunks too pure to be natural. He kept a private vault beneath the estate, a room no one but he entered, sealed with a heavy wooden door carved with symbols no man had ever seen. It was there, townsfolk said, that he counted his blessings. But something darker began to sprout alongside the golden fields. Blood, not metaphorical, not a curse of fate, actual blood. It began in the irrigation trenches, a red tint, dismissed at first as rust or iron-rich soil. But it thickened with each week, staining the roots of plants, soaking the earth. The workers spoke of digging too deep and uncovering bones, not fossilized, but fresh and wet with marrow. Enoch said nothing. He dismissed concerns with a wave of his hand. All soil remembers, he'd say. This land is simply old. But Deliverance knew better. She kept her room by day and wandered by night, guided by instinct and fear. She watched the golden field through the cracked glass of the east wing, saw the scarecrows multiply without explanation. There were now 12, one for each plot, and each wore a different face. Real faces, human faces, stitched with twine. One morning, she found a burlap sack outside her door. Inside was a rabbit, its eyes sewn shut, its body still twitching. She buried it beneath the camellia tree, the same place her brothers had once played. The tree never bloomed again. At night, her father sang to the walls. Not lullabies, no, these were dirges. Low, chanted tones that caused the mirrors to ripple and the fire to dim. She would press her ear to the floor and hear voices beneath the stone, whispering back in a dialect older than English. She stopped praying. There was no God in that house anymore. The workers began to leave. Those who stayed drank heavily or never spoke again. A man named Elias gouged out his own eyes after a night in the fields, screaming that the roots have teeth, the roots have teeth. They found him clawing at the barn wall. Blood streaked in circles. The gold kept flowing. Visitors stopped coming. Mail ceased to arrive. Deliverance wrote more in her journal, describing things that even ink seemed to resist. Ink that bled into the page, words that rearranged themselves when she wasn't looking. She no longer trusted the mirrors, where her reflection lingered after she turned away. One night, She stood at the edge of the golden field and watched the wind move through it. It didn't move like wind. It moved with purpose, parting the stalks in a perfect spiral, revealing the bare earth beneath. And at the center of that spiral stood the 13th scarecrow, its face covered in a cloth she recognized, her mother's wedding veil. She fled back to the house, and when she looked again, the spiral had vanished. And still the harvest came, too bountiful, too perfect. She watched as the fruits of the land piled high in the cellars, untouched, never spoiling. Rats refused to eat the grain. Dogs wouldn't go near the meat. And all the while, Enoch grew younger, his hair darkening, his skin smoothing, his voice deepening with unnatural vibrancy. He barely acknowledged deliverance anymore. He spoke more often to the walls, or to the shadows that hung just out of reach. The crimson harvest grew. The color bled into everything. The petals of flowers, the shells of eggs, the water from the well. It became clear to Deliverance that the bounty was not a gift, but an exchange. The land wasn't giving life. It was taking it. And so she did what she could. She began planting silver in the corners of her room, placing salt beneath her pillow, hanging iron nails above the doors. Old protections. She whispered her mother's prayers backward. She burned pages from her own journal and scattered the ashes. But the whispers only grew louder. And in the dead of night, when the golden fields glowed with a sickly sheen beneath the moon, she would sometimes hear it, a voice calling her name from the heart of the earth. Not her father, not human, something that had been promised, something that had been waiting. And always from the golden fields, the wind returned, carrying the scent of blood and the hum of harvest. July 3rd, 1819. I had begun to dream in voices that are not mine. At first, I thought them remnants of overheard prayers or my father's midnight mutterings. But they are not. They are older, hungrier. They call to me from beneath the walls and the roots, whispering in a tongue that sears the inside of my skull. I wake with blood on my pillow and the taste of copper on my tongue. There are names I dare not speak aloud, not even here in ink. Deliverance's journal was not merely a record. It was a confessional carved in desperation, its leather binding cracked at the spine, the pages curling like dried leaves, written in a slanting hand, often interrupted by scratches or dark stains. The entries felt like letters to no one, or to something that read between the lines. As I read, I began to feel her presence with me in the room. She became more than a figure from the past. She was a witness, a prisoner, and perhaps the only one who ever truly fought back. August 10th, 1819. Father no longer eats. He sits for supper, smiles politely, but his plate remains untouched. I watched him one evening through a gap in the study door. He removed his gloves and placed his hand on the table. The flesh moved, shifted, like something was crawling beneath his skin. He whispered a name, and the candles flickered blue. He has not called me daughter in weeks, only offspring, as though I were a thing he'd made, not someone born. Her writing oscillated between calm observations and frantic scrawl, the kind of ink left behind in bursts of terror. Some pages were torn. Others were burned at the edges. Certain passages were redacted entirely, lines smeared out with charcoal or oil. But what remained painted a clear portrait. Deliverance had come to suspect her father's pact was not just generational. It was eternal. She believed he had given not only his blood, but the blood of all his kin. A tithe. September 4th, 1819. The chapel beneath the house is larger than I remembered. There is a second door now. It was not there before. Behind it is a staircase that descends into the dark, far deeper than the house's foundations. I threw a stone down and never heard it land. I believe this place was not built by men. Or, if it was, those men were no longer human by the time they finished. She described the growing infestation of her dreams. Visions of hands reaching up from the soil, mouths sewn shut with gold thread, and a mirror that showed not a reflection, but a bleeding tree. She was terrified of sleep, and yet sleep was the only time she could hear them clearly. The ones beneath, the ones waiting. She began to piece together a lineage of sacrifice, marking the date of each unnatural death or disappearance in her family line. She feared she was next. October 17th, 1819. Tonight, I saw myself buried alive in the orchard. I woke to find dirt under my fingernails and leaves in my hair. There was a name written on my chest in ash. I have tried to burn this journal 3 times. Each time, the flames go out. It does not want to die. Or perhaps they do not want it to. This may be the only truth that survives when we are all gone. She tried to escape once. Packed a bag with nothing but salt, iron nails, and a crucifix she stole from the Varnum Chapel. She made it as far as the tree-line, before the crows came. Not birds, crows. Things that wore their shape, with eyes like splinters and beaks that whispered her father's name. She returned to the house bleeding from her ears. Her next entry was short, almost childlike. November 2nd, 1819. The house is not letting me go. It loves me in the way a spider loves its prey. Deliverance came to believe there was only one way to sever the blood covenant. She had to record every truth, every betrayal, and hide it where only a future Sinclair could find it. She saw herself not as a victim, but as a message in a bottle cast into time. In the final pages, her handwriting deteriorated. The words became jagged, etched into the paper as though her hand was shaking uncontrollably. December 19th, 1819. He stands outside my door every night now. He does not knock. He whispers my name as if tasting it. Sometimes I hear another voice with him. Lower, older. I will not give them my mind. I will not give them my soul. If you find this, you must finish what I could not. The roots drink more than water. The gold was never gold. It was bone. We were never the owners. We were the offering. And on the final page, do not bleed inside the house. It remembers. It wakes. I closed the journal and found my hands trembling. My breath fogged the glass, though the room was warm. Deliverance had left me breadcrumbs soaked in blood. Her voice echoed across centuries not to haunt me, but to warn me. And somewhere beneath my feet, I swear I could hear it again. That same low whisper from my first night here. Only this time, it knew my name. My dreams turned dark after the journal. Not just eerie, but wrong. Like I was sleeping in someone else's memories. In one, I stood at the edge of clearing lit only by a red moon. The golden fields were gone, replaced by black, brittle grass that cracked underfoot. The Sinclair estate loomed in the distance, but it was no longer a house. It was a charnel cathedral, its windows gaping open like screaming mouths. And something stood beside me. Not a man. Not anymore. He wore a tattered cloak the color of dried blood, the hem dragging through ash. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, the kind worn by gravediggers and beggars in old paintings. Where his eyes should have been, there was only skin. Smooth, unbroken, pale as wax. In his hands, he held a platter. On it, a heart, still beating. He did not speak. He only waited. When I woke, my wrist was bleeding. 3 perfect lines carved into the flesh, parallel and shallow, like a symbol or signature. The same mark appeared in Deliverance's journal, drawn in charcoal on the margins of the last page. The Sin Eater. In Southern folklore, the Sin Eater is a shadowed figure, summoned in secret, who consumes the spiritual filth of the dying. A piece of bread placed upon a corpse's chest. A cup of wine passed over a grave. The Sin Eater ingests the sins of another, becoming heavier with every transgression consumed. But the version in Deliverance's writings was older, meaner. He didn't come to cleanse sin. He came to collect it. The mark burned for days. Not like a wound, like a brand. I wrapped it in gauze and salt, but it kept reopening in my sleep. I'd find blood on my pillow, my sheets, even smeared along the wooden floor. And with every new stain, the house grew quieter. Not peaceful, expectant. I began to notice changes in the air. It hung heavier in certain rooms, especially at twilight. The parlor near the east wing always smelled of wilted flowers and sulfur. The library groaned with the sound of shifting books, even when I was the only one inside. And the mirrors, God, the mirrors, they no longer showed just me. Reflections lagged behind like they resented being summoned. Sometimes I caught glimpses of other faces, mottled and blurred, lips moving in silence. And always, over my shoulder, that same figure. Hat wide, face hidden, hands outstretched with a platter of meat. The Sin Eater didn't speak with a voice. He waited. One night, I dreamed of Deliverance again. She stood in the old cellar chapel, barefoot, her hands covered in soot. She was drawing a circle around herself in salt, muttering prayers through clenched teeth. The walls bled. The floor pulsed beneath her like a beating heart. And in the shadows behind her, the Sin Eater loomed. He did not touch her, but he marked her. The same 3 parallel lines appeared on her wrist, glowing red before searing black. She screamed, and the chapel caught fire. I awoke to smoke. Panic clawed at my throat, but it wasn't fire. It was a fireplace in the study, lit somehow, despite never being used. The flames crackled high, throwing twisted shadows across the walls, and carved into the soot-stained bricks above the mantel. Eaten but not cleansed. The letters weren't written. They were burned into the stone. I backed out of the room and nearly tripped over the platter. It sat in the hallway outside the study door. Silver, old, ornate, exactly like the one in my dreams. But instead of a heart, this time there were teeth. Human, still blood-slick, arranged in a perfect circle. I vomited in the sink and didn't sleep for 2 days. I turned to Deliverance's journal again, hoping for answers. She wrote of the Sin Eater as a witness to the pact, not a participant. He watched from the edge of every blood ritual, always silent, always hungry. He did not create the covenant. He did not enforce it, but he benefited from it. Every sacrifice fed him. Every death in the Sinclair line, voluntary or otherwise, passed through him. He was a vessel for sins too old and blackened to be contained by scripture or fire. And when a Sinclair was marked, their end was already written. I researched feverishly. Books from the town library, forgotten archives, the old priest in Varnum, who refused to meet my eyes when I asked about Sin Eaters. He only muttered one phrase over and over. He waits where the dead feed the roots. The wound on my wrist began to itch, not from healing, from movement. I pressed on the skin one night and felt something shift, something just beneath the surface, like thread being pulled tight. I screamed, and from somewhere in the depths of the house, I heard a knock, not at the door, beneath the floor. Once, twice, then silence. That night, I dreamt of the vault, not the gold vault, but another, deeper one. A room of bone and brick and black candles. The Sin Eater waited in the center, a throne of twisted antlers rising behind him. This time he spoke. His voice was like a famine. You carry your father's hunger, and your father's father's, and so you shall feed me too. I awoke screaming, my wrist bleeding anew. The mark had deepened. There was no more pretending, no more rationalizing. The Sinclair name wasn't merely cursed, it was claimed, and I was the last in a long, rotted line of blood, claw at salvation that would never come cheap. The Sin Eater had marked me. Now he was coming to collect. It began with the walls. They pulsed, not visibly at first, but I could feel it. A low, rhythmic thrum beneath my palms, like a distant heartbeat traveling through the wood. I told myself it was vibration from the pipes, the settling of an old house, the tricks of insomnia. But deep down I knew better. The house was breathing. The second sign was the blood. It came without warning. One afternoon, as I stood washing my hands at the sink, I felt a sharp pressure in my nose, then a rush of warmth. Blood poured freely down my face, thick and dark. It didn't clot. It didn't stop. I used half a roll of paper towels, and still it kept coming. I leaned over the sink, gasping, as the water swirled pink beneath me. I passed out. When I awoke, the bathroom mirror was covered in smeared fingerprints, not mine, and written in blood just above my reflection. You cannot purge what was promised. The third sign was a silence. Not quiet, silence. Total, oppressive, unnatural stillness. No birds. No insects. No wind against the windows. Even the ticking grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped, though I'd wounded just the night before. It was as if the house had sunk beneath the surface of sound. Only one noise remained, the whisper, soft, constant, just beneath the range of hearing. A murmur from the walls, from the vents, from beneath the floor. Sometimes it sounded like chanting, sometimes laughter. Always, it made my skin crawl. I pressed a glass to the wall one night and listened. A woman's voice, faint and far away. He feeds through you. He watches through you. Let the blood in. My reflection began to move on its own. It started small, a blink out of rhythm, a head tilt that didn't match mine. Then came the smiles. Wide, slow, knowing smiles that split my reflection's face even as mine stayed frozen in horror. One night, I saw it whisper something. I leaned closer. It whispered again. My name. The dreams returned with a vengeance. In one, I stood in the fields of gold, now soaked red to the knees. The crops writhed like living things, and hands reached up from the soil to clutch at my legs, pulling me downward. The sin-eater stood at the edge, arms open like a preacher, and behind him rose the Sinclair house, on fire, yet unburned. From its upper window, Deliverance stared down at me. She was mouthing something. Run. I began keeping all the lights on. It didn't help. Darkness leaked in anyway, around door frames, beneath the cracks in the floorboards, through the keyholes. It was intentional. The house made sure of it. Shadows moved when I blinked. They grew teeth. At night, the paintings in the hallway changed. Where once they'd shown stoic ancestors in faded oils, now they showed something else. Mouths where there should be eyes, blood pouring from their ears, hands that clawed at the canvas from within, and always the same symbol etched subtly into their frames. 3 lines. The sin-eater's mark. My skin began to itch, then burn. Tiny, hairline scratches appear along my arms and chest. I thought it was psychosomatic, until I found them arranged into patterns. Circles, triangles, one on my left thigh that resembled a binding rune I'd seen in Deliverance's journal. The worst was the one I found on my back. I couldn't see it fully, only feel it when I brushed against a mirror, but it was large, sprawling across my shoulder blades like a second spine, and it bled. Constantly. I stopped answering phone calls. The few times I picked up, the line was dead, until a voice I didn't recognize whispered, "You're warming the house." And then came the worst day, the boiling day. It started with pain. A heat in my veins that spread rapidly, as though my blood had turned to fire. My skin flushed red and raw. My eyes swelled. My breath grew shallow. I staggered through the house, sweating and shaking, unable to think, unable to be. The walls bled, not metaphorically. Actual, viscous blood oozed from between the wooden panels, trickling down like tears. I touched it. It was warm. It hissed when it hit the floor. I collapsed in the foyer, vision swimming. Above me, hanging from the ceiling like a chandelier, were bodies, strung upside down, faces obscured by burlap, arms outstretched in supplication. They turned slowly, weightless in the air, dripping blood that fell on my face. I blinked. Gone. When I woke, night had fallen. The house was completely dark. No lights, no stars, just a smothering blackness pressing from all sides. And at the center of the room, the sin-eater stood. Not a hallucination, not a dream. He moved slowly, silently, and where he stepped, the floor cracked. The wood splintered, blackened, turned to ash. He held out the platter. This time, my own face lay upon it. Eyes open, mouth sewn shut, still breathing. I screamed. I ran. Somehow, I made it back to my room and locked the door. I don't remember how. My memories are broken. Snippets of pain and screaming, and the sound of roots cracking through stone. I slept with the journal clutched in my hands, and Deliverance's final words echoed over and over in my mind. Do not bleed inside the house. It remembers. It wakes. But it was too late. The blood had already boiled. And the house? The house was wide awake. The cellar door had been sealed when I first arrived. A heavy iron bolt across warped wood, rusted shut with time and neglect. I hadn't thought much of it. An old house always hides its basements. But after the blood boiled, after the sin-eater showed me my own face on that platter, I knew it was time. Deliverance had written about the cellar chapel in vague, trembling detail. a place her father disappeared into for hours, reeking of sulfur and whispers. She called it the heart of the house, the belly of the curse, the roots beneath the rot. I forced the bolt open with a crowbar, splinters flying into the air like bone fragments. As the door creaked inward, a breath of stale, moist air spilled out, a scent like wet stone, burned wax, and rotting meat. I stepped into the dark. The stairs descended far deeper than any cellar had a right to, what gave way to stone, dust to mold, cobwebs to strands of hair, long and clinging, swaying as if stirred by breath. The walls narrowed as I descended. The air grew colder, not the cold of absence, but containment, a cold that had a shape and a presence. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. What lay at the bottom was not a cellar. It was a sanctuary. The chapel had no pews, no cross, no altar of mercy. Instead, it was circular. 12 pillars of carved bone surrounding a central pit from which a slow, wet drip echoed endlessly into the void below. Symbols were etched into the stone walls, glowing faintly with a sick green light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Above the pit hung a cage, empty but stained. Beneath it, a slab of obsidian, cracked down the center, its surface littered with old offerings, coins, teeth, locks of hair, brittle pieces of bone carved with runes. And on the far wall, something worse, a mural, painted in blood and gold. It showed the Sin Eater, larger than life, looming above the Sinclair estate, his face still hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but now his arms were outstretched over the land, like a shepherd claiming his flock. Beneath him knelt generations of Sinclairs, their faces contorted in agony, offering pieces of themselves, hearts, eyes, tongues, to fill his ever-empty platter. And above it all, scrawled in ancient script, from one blood, many feasts. From many feasts, one reign. I couldn't move. The longer I stared, the louder the whispers became. They didn't come from the mural or the pit. They came from within me, echoing through my bones, vibrating in my teeth. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, but still they poured in. You are the last. You are the key. You are the meal. I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours. Maybe days. Time slipped and twisted in that place. Eventually, I forced myself to my feet and followed a passage at the far end of the chapel, half collapsed, choked with roots and dust. It led to a small chamber, cramped, bare, and there I found her, Deliverance, or what remained. Her bones were folded in a fetal position, wrapped in a decaying shawl. Around her neck was a key, blackened with age. In her hands, a scroll, sealed with wax stamped by the same 3-line symbol carved into my wrist. I took it with shaking fingers. The moment I touched it, the entire chapel trembled. The mural bled. I fled, climbed the stairs with fire in my lungs, my ears ringing, my eyes watering from the stench of centuries. The cellar door slammed behind me as I reached the top, the bolt sliding shut on its own. I didn't try to reopen it. I couldn't. Not yet. Back in my room, I lit every candle I could find. I wrapped myself in blankets, the scroll pressing my chest like a crucifix. I didn't dare break the seal, not until I could breathe, not until the whispering eased. They didn't. They got louder, more insistent, and now they knew I had it. The house groaned around me. Footsteps padded in the attic. Doors opened down empty halls. My reflection moved constantly, pacing, pointing to the floor. And beneath my feet, the chapel waited, breathing, pulsing. The scroll burned with heat. Deliverance had risked everything to leave it behind. Her final act was not escape. It was instruction. She had carved a path forward through madness and death, left a map scrawled in blood and truth. Whatever the scroll contained, it was my only chance to sever the covenant, to end the reign of the Sin Eater. But something told me it would cost more than ink or incantation. It would demand blood, mine, or worse. As I stared into the dancing candlelight, I saw the Sin Eater again, not in my dreams, in the corner of the room, still, silent, holding the platter, waiting, always waiting. There are moments now when I do not recognize my own hands. They tremble constantly, even when at rest. Sometimes they twitch toward things of their own accord: knives, mirrors, the blood-dark journal on my nightstand. I've begun wearing gloves to stop them, but I don't always remember putting them on. The madness creeps in gently, like ivy on stone, like rot beneath paint. The scroll remains unopened, sealed with a wax emblem that radiates heat. I fear it. I need it. I dream of it unrolling itself in the night and whispering its contents into my ear. Deliverance warned me. The truth could kill, but not knowing is killing me faster. I began to research my lineage. The Sinclair name, though now buried in dust and time, was once whispered in old court records, death ledgers, and asylum logs. I drove to the courthouse in Varnum. The clerk, an old woman with cataract eyes, refused to speak once she read my name. Instead, she handed me a folder, unlabeled, heavy, yellow with age. Inside, the unspoken history of my bloodline. Enoch Sinclair died in 1867. At least, that's what the public record says. But his grave was found empty. No body, no rot, only a sealed box beneath the headstone, containing 13 rings, each one belonging to a male heir who had disappeared without explanation between 1835 and 1865. No bones, no records, just rings. Deliverance's name never appeared again after 1820, the same year the chapel was bricked shut, the same year the Varnum parish burned down with all its records inside. Coincidence? No. A culling, a silencing. The madness of my family has a pattern. Each generation ends in whispers, blood, and vanishing. Great-Uncle Charles was found raving naked in a tobacco field, convinced his shadow was trying to strangle him. My mother was institutionalized twice before my birth, both times for compulsive mirror fasting, refusing to look at her own reflection for months. Her final years were a slow spiral into catatonia, broken only by midnight screaming fits about him in the crawlspace. No one believed her. Now I do. The mirror in my bedroom no longer shows my face. Instead, it shows his, the sin eater, standing behind me, always behind me. Sometimes, his hand rests gently on my shoulder. Sometimes, he feeds me something I can't remember tasting. I've started losing time. Not hours, days. I wake in new clothes. My fingernails are crusted with dirt. My tongue tastes like metal. I found photographs on my phone I didn't take, images of the cellar, the chapel, a mural painted in what looks like fresh blood. In one of them, I'm smiling. That terrifies me most of all. I set up a camera in the hallway, watched the footage the next morning with shaking hands. At 2:41 a.m., the door to my bedroom opens. I step out calm, composed, barefoot. I walk down the stairs. I begin humming. The tune is low, lilting, eerily familiar. A lullaby my mother used to sing, though I never taught it to myself. I disappear into the dark. For hours later, I return. My hands are red. I am crying, but silently. Then I climb back into bed as if nothing happened. I don't remember any of it. The scroll pulses in my drawer. I hear it when I sleep. Sometimes I think it's alive. Sometimes I think it's waiting for the right moment to open. Deliverance had called it the legacy of madness. But it's not madness, not really. Not the kind that can be treated with medication or therapy. It's infestation. We are inhabited. Every Sinclair heir becomes a conduit for something older than our name, older than this land, older than the language we use to scream. Madness is just the mask it wears. The voices are louder now. Sometimes they speak in rhyme. Sometimes they tell me to die. Other times, they ask me to join them, join my family, join the fields, join the feast. I found a message scratched into the inside of my closet door. Not written by me. Different handwriting. Smaller, frantic. He eats memory first. Then the face. Then the name. You are forgetting already. They're right. I had to check my license today just to remember what I'm called. There's something growing in the basement. I hear it breathing. It smells like wet earth and old teeth. The house watches me now. Not metaphorically. I mean literally. Not holes in would expand when I walk past, following my movement. Picture frames tilt to listen. I caught a door closing itself when I said, Sin Eater aloud. Every corner holds eyes. Every mirror holds lies. Every window reflects something behind me. I screamed at the house last night, begged it to let me go. I told it I wasn't like them, that I didn't make a pact, that I never asked for this. The walls bled in response. And I swear I heard my mother laughing. The madness isn't the end. It's the threshold. Beyond it is something worse, something truer, the full weight of the covenant, the full gravity of what Enoch Sinclair fed to the earth, and what the earth, in turn, has been feeding ever since. I am not just a descendant. I am the final dish, the last course. And the Sin Eater, he's already holding his knife and fork. I no longer sleep. Not truly. I drift in and out of something like dreaming, but it's not rest. It's proximity, like lying too close to generator humming, just beneath your skull. My eyes close, and I see things that aren't mine. Flashes of ritual, of blood dripping onto carved stone, of mouth sewn shut with golden thread. And always, always he is there, the Sin Eater. He doesn't need to return. He never left. Last night, I woke with dirt under my fingernails and moss in my mouth. I was on the back porch, barefoot, shivering, knees red with soil. In my hand was a dead bird, still warm. Its eyes had been plucked out, not gouged, scooped with precise, loving care. I don't remember doing it, but I remember the sensation, satisfaction. The house no longer tries to frighten me. That would be redundant. Now it whispers lullabies, soothing songs I can almost remember from my childhood, even though I know no one ever sang them. They drift down the hallways at dusk, trailing cold air behind them. Sometimes I hear someone humming along. Sometimes it's my own voice. And sometimes it's his. The Sin Eater visits me every night now. Not always visible, but felt. Sometimes it's the scent of candle wax and scorch bone. Other times it's a shadow that stretches too long, that bends around corners I haven't turned. Once, I looked in the fireplace and saw a face in the flames, not screaming, not pleading, smiling, waiting. I began talking to him. It felt inevitable. What else could I do? Ignore the voice of my blood? Pretend I didn't hear my own name whisper from the rafters in 12 different languages? Deny the handprints that bloom across my bedroom ceiling each morning? I sat in the library and spoke aloud. What do you want? The wind answered, rattling the windows. Not wind. A word hidden inside it. Continuance. Later that same night, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not a glance. A stare. What I saw didn't blink. The reflection leaned forward, mouth twisting unnaturally, and said, We're almost ripe. I've started seeing the others. Not fully, just glimpses. They move through the halls at night. Ancestors. Offerings. Hollow-eyed phantoms dressed in century-old garb. They drift like smoke, sometimes crawling on all fours, sometimes gliding on their backs across the ceiling. They hum. They moan. They smile when they see me. One stopped at my door. It wore Deliverance's face. Only, the mouth had been sewn shut with silver wire. She pointed behind me. I turned. The Sin Eater stood there, less shadow now, more shape. He reached out and touched my chest. It burned. I woke gasping, shirt soaked with blood, skin blistered in the shape of 3 fingers. The scroll finally broke its seal on its own. No noise, no ceremony. I found it unrolled on my bed, the parchment pulsing with warmth like living skin. The writing writhed across the surface, black ink that refused to stay still. Words contorting like they were alive. I could only read parts of it, but what I understood changed everything. It wasn't just a curse. It was a contract. A bargain struck not for gold or power, but for continuity. The Sinclairs would flourish. They would rule the land, fatten the soil, bleed wealth from the stone. In return, they would become the meal. Each generation, a piece of themselves fed to something ancient, a being born not of flesh, but of belief and blood. The Sin Eater, an entity summoned by hunger, sustained by lineage, bound by recognition, which meant, so long as someone carried the name, so long as the pact was remembered, he could not die. That's why the house refused to let me go. Not because it needed me to stay, because I was the last, the final course. I tried to run again, drove down the old dirt road past the gates, tires screeching on gravel, screaming through my windshield like a man possessed. The forest bent inward, branches clawed the windows. The sky turned black in seconds. I drove for 2 hours, maybe more, but when I finally emerged into clearing, the house was there, waiting, as if I'd never left. The Sin Eater stood on the porch, hat in hand, bowing. That night I saw the full ritual, not in dreams, in memory. My body moved without me, down to the chapel, into the pit. The obsidian altar waited, and on it, my family's offerings pulsed in piles of rotting flesh. I placed my hand on the stone. Whispers erupted from the earth. You are the final cut, the chosen marrow. The Sin Eater circled me. His platter glowed. I snapped awake on the floor of my bedroom, screaming, naked, wrist bleeding, mouth full of dirt. The mirror across the room cracked without being touched. I'm not alone anymore. He's inside now, in my skin, in my eyes, in the ache behind my teeth. I hear him when I speak. I see him when I blink. There is no return. He's always been here, waiting, and now he's ready to eat. The house no longer pretends. Every wall breathes. Every window watches. The mirrors chant without mouths. The portraits have turned their faces away. The doors creak open not with wind, but with invitation. And the Sin Eater follows me from room to room, never touching, never speaking now. Just waiting. But I am not Deliverance. I am the last, and the last always has a choice. The scroll's instructions were clearer now, etched in flowing symbols that had settled into legibility with blood. Mine, I think. At the bottom, in a language I shouldn't know but understood instinctively, it read, to star the god, deny the offering. Not destroy, not escape, deny. I gathered the tools. The old silver key from Deliverance's corpse, a mirror wrapped in cloth, salt. So much salt I raided every corner store within a 20-mile radius, and a matchbook, not for light, for fire. The house screamed when I approached the cellar door. The floor groaned beneath my steps, bleeding at the seams. The wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing names scratched beneath. My name, over and over, in a dozen different hands. I felt the Sin Eater behind me, growing more corporeal with every step. But he didn't stop me. Why would he? He thought I was finishing the feast. He didn't know I was setting the table for something else. The key turned. The bolt surrendered. The cellar door yawned open, and I descended. The chapel pulsed with warmth, louder than before, hungrier. The mural bled from its cracks, thick and black like oil. The altar glowed faintly. The cage above the pit swung gently back and forth, and the symbols on the walls screamed in silence. I laid the salt in a circle, placed a mirror at the northern point, opened a scroll, and placed it on the altar. And I waited. He came quickly, the Sin Eater, more real than ever, taller than the room allowed, yet somehow he fit, hat dipped low, hands folded around his platter. No face still, just a suggestion of shadow and hunger. He stepped toward the circle. Stopped. He knew. At last he knew. You fed on us for centuries, I said. My voice cracked, but it held. But you're not owed. The pact wasn't made by me. He didn't move. I removed the gloves, held up my wrist. The mark was gone. In its place, a burn, 3 parallel scars, seared shut, not removed, healed. I am not your meal, I said. I'm the bill. He stepped back. His hands trembled. I reached for the matchbook, lit the first, tossed it into the pit. The flames burst upward, not yellow but white, consuming nothing, illuminating everything. The cage above the pit unraveled. Bones fell like rain. Skulls, ribs, jaws still biting down. They were all there. The Sinclairs, the bloodline. He screamed. Not aloud, in me. The scream vibrated through my marrow, through the foundation, through time itself. I lit the second match, dropped it onto the scroll. It ignited with a shriek. The symbols writhed as they burned. The blood pact turned to ash. And with it, the mural split down the middle, releasing a torrent of black wind that howled like the dead. The Sin Eater staggered, reeled, dropped the platter. I held the mirror to him. He saw himself for the first time. His reflection twisted, changed, became me. No, became all of us. Every face he had consumed, every soul he had carried, all screaming at once. He began to unravel, slowly, painfully, not dying, starving. And the hunger turned inward. He tried to run. The shadows rejected him. He tried to flee into me, but the circle held. I stepped back, let him eat himself. The flames spread to the walls, to the ceiling, to the mural. The chapel collapsed inward, not with destruction, but with release. The weight lifted. The pull stopped. The silence returned. And in it, peace. I crawled from the cellar just before the first beam fell. Smoke swallowed the halls. The house, once immortal, began to rot in seconds. Time reclaimed it. Walls cracked. Windows shattered. Portraits peeled from the wall in sheets of ash. And at the top of the stairs, Deliverance stood, whole, smiling. She nodded and vanished. I walked into field as the house burned, watched the flames rise, heard no screams, only the crackle of something ending. I stayed until dawn. Ash covered the estate like snow. The field were gone. The whispers gone. The hunger, finally, gone. The fire spread faster than nature allowed. It didn't just burn, it consumed. Whole rooms disappeared in seconds, the flames not orange but a blinding, devouring white. The Sinclair estate screamed as it died, the wood moaning, the stone groaning under the weight of centuries of sin. I stood at the edge of the field. Where once golden crops had stood, now only blackened earth remained. But as the flames reached the boundary between house and field, something stirred beneath the soil. The land resisted. The pact may have been broken, but the roots remembered. The ground heaved. Fissures opened in the earth like wounds. From them rose the remnants of the covenant, the physical manifestations of every generation's offering. Bones, teeth, scattered gold artifacts soaked in ancient blood. Even the twisted remains of the scarecrows, no longer straw, but flesh dried and contorted into grotesque parodies of men, pulled themselves upright. They screamed, not from pain, but from loss. Their God was dying, and with him, I ran into the field. The fire followed, dancing along the stalks that should have been long dead. But the field breathed, the soil writhed beneath my feet. Fingers reached up, clutching, pleading. One clutched at my ankle. I stomped it flat and kept moving. I reached the center, the spiral where the 13th scarecrow once stood. Now it was empty, but not silent. There, the Sin Eater knelt, collapsed, diminished, no longer towering, no longer godlike, just a man-shaped hunger, hollow-eyed, starving. His platter lay beside him, cracked down the center, empty. He looked at me, not in fury, in desperation. He raised a trembling hand. Feed me? I stepped closer, kneeling, and whispered, no. I placed the last match on the platter, lit it. The flames ignited instantly, racing down the spiral in a ring of fire, encircling the Sin Eater. He screamed. His voice made 1,000 mouths, a hurricane of agony. The fire licked upward, and from within it, I saw every Sinclair soul rise. Deliverance, Charles, my mother, all of them. They did not weep. They watched. As the fire reached the Sin Eater's heart, he collapsed inward, flesh to ash, ash to nothing. Silence followed, true silence. The spiral burned for hours. The house behind me collapsed in on itself, devoured. No screams, no spirits, no shadows, just the sound of history ending. At dawn, I stood in the center of the ruin, my clothes torn, my body scorched, but alive and alone. The roots no longer moved. The hunger was gone. The pact was broken. And for the first time since 1817, the land was free. The land is silent now. Where once the Sinclair estate stood, there's only ash and scorched earth. No bird sing, no animal stir. The soil is black as though mourning, but beneath that soot lies peace. Not the uneasy stillness of secret buried, but the calm of a wound finally closed. I've left the ruins untouched. No markers, no memorial. Let the past rot quietly. It's earned the rest. I've kept Deliverance's journal. The pages are brittle, but whole. I've read it again many times now, not to understand a curse, but to understand her, what she suffered, what she endured. She wasn't just a victim. She was the first resistance. Without her, I wouldn't have known where to look, wouldn't have known what to break. She fought the hunger and gave me the tools to finish what she began. And in that final moment, I think she saw freedom. I still dream, but not of him, not of the Sin Eater. Now I dream of wind through quiet trees, of a field that grows nothing and means nothing, of silence. Sometimes I see her in those dreams, standing beneath a camellia tree that finally blooms. She never speaks. She only watches and smiles. I've changed my name, legally, burned every document that tied me to the Sinclair bloodline. I don't carry it anymore. No more offerings. No more debt. It ends with me. And yet, sometimes when I pass a mirror, I hesitate, just to be sure, just to see if it moves when I don't. So far it hasn't. But I never stay long, and I never look too deep. The land has gone quiet. But I know others like me exist, heirs to houses filled with whispers, to bloodlines stained with bargains, to ghosts who refuse to rest. To them I say this: you are not cursed because you come from darkness. You are cursed only if you feed it. Break the pact. Starve the god. Burn the field. And if you find a platter set before you in a dream, asterisk. Don't eat, because once you do, he comes back.